Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, in this wintry wonderland, we welcome you in. A curious little article appeared on sciencenews.org. It's one of the places I like to go to check out what the latest breakthroughs are because despite my advanced age, I'm still a little kid inside sometimes. Show me an exciting bit of new technology, and I'm as happy as a clam. But as I was scrolling through the news, I noticed a very disturbing article. Specifically, it says over the past 8 years, they've been going through this massive effort. They've been doing 193 experiments just trying to replicate the papers that have been published about cancer. Now we know every month at least somebody comes out and says this could be the magic bullet that takes care of cancer. Yes, it's something. Cancer is the number 2 or number 3 killer depending on which source you trust. Heart disease tends to always take the top. But yeah, cancer is not far behind, and none of those diseases are pleasant. So I can understand a lot of money being thrown at this stuff. What's discouraging is just the sheer numbers. Out of 193 experiments, that's official experiments they were running, based off papers that had already been published, that had already been peer-reviewed, that had already made it into the journals, only about a quarter of them were actually successfully replicated. Science is a skeptical process. Now, by skeptic, I don't mean those jerks that sit there with their arms folded and I'm not believing anything. I mean, it's a process that is supposed to be self-editing. And peer review is supposed to be in that process. When you publish your findings, they're supposed to be reviewed before they get published. You're supposed to be able to reproduce them. So we wind up with the question, how did they get into the papers in the first place? Now, let's be honest. Science is tough. There's a lot of blips. The famous wow signal from the 1970s. One blip that has never been replicated and never seen again. So we can't point to it and say anything about it because we've only seen it once. But scientific papers get around that by using the scientific method. Think back to your middle school science class here for a second. Remember all those things that you had to do both for the science fair and for science experiments in class? You remember. You had to have your hypothesis, what you think is going to happen, your methodology, how are you going to go about accomplishing that, the results, whatever the experiment told you, and ultimately your conclusion. The same is true for higher levels. It's just those get broken down much more significantly. So what we're seeing is the methodology, what you do to perform your experiment, to put in its basest terms, is somehow not taking place. Now this is where we get to the disturbing part. When you dig down into the article, it says the scientists who were in charge of reproducing those 193 experiments were not given enough information from either the original papers or from the authors. This is where I have difficulty wrapping my head around it. I have a couple friends doing their master's and PhD at present, and I can tell you the papers that they have to write are substantial. And I've written substantial papers in the past, and so much of it is spent defining your methodology, defining your terms, making sure everything is set up so that mistakes like this can't happen, and so that your experiment will be reproducible. This is exactly why some experiments are relegated to the top secret realm, because they want to reproduce them, but only in amongst their private clique. Stealth aircraft, for example. The Soviets were actually Soviet scientists was the first one to publish papers that were outlining how geometry could be used to make a plane invisible to radar. The Soviets never took much attention of it. They left it unclassified. Of course, we know the United States took a hold of that and developed it to the level where it is today. But it was an experiment, a theory that was put into practice and used. It was easily, well, I won't say easily, but it was replicatable. It was something they could demonstrate, this works, these are the reasons it works, and we can demonstrate that it works with computer models, with real-life models, etc., etc. There is a precedent for this. Back in the 80s and early 90s, I think, a group of sociologists wanted to do a pretty simple experiment. And it was just to see how many people washed their hands properly. This should be highly relevant in our pandemic-stricken times. And at first, their methodology consisted of, remember, you do the experiments, everything before you write the paper. And at first, their methodology was they wanted the full 20 seconds, sing happy birthday to yourself, soap and water, etc. But they were getting such few results that they had to revise their methodology to anybody whose hands touched the water. And I'm afraid this may be the same with the studies. The authors can't really say exactly what they did because they had to change a whole lot of things in their experiments. It turns out some of these experiments were 35% effective and others had 85% effective. And again, as long as it's statistically significant, more than 10%, then it's ruled not to be chance. So these papers can be put out for somebody else to deal with. Because that's what a lot of science is, whether it's physics or sociology, whatever it is, you're just trying to identify something that's greater than chance. And unfortunately, the academic world revolves around this. It's actually a monumental effort that's gone through, and for the quarter of experiments that we have, what is that, that'll be about 50 experiments of 193, let's just ballpark it. So about 50 of those experiments have been duplicated, so they're worth looking into. And in turn, about let's ballpark it to 150 experiments did not work. Where are the methodologies going? Like, it's one thing when you're counting people washing hands. It's completely another thing when you have your petri dish and your cultures and whatever they're being exposed to and how it changes whatever it is. That methodology should remain pretty consistent over time. But this happens a whole lot. Science is skeptical. First of all, a claim must be falsifiable. That means it must be able to be proved wrong. So you're starting off with the assumption that you're probably right, but there's a chance that you're wrong. But to get funding, it's not really easy to say, this might not work. You got to be positive about it. And ultimately, you got to show results. Science, unfortunately, is still in the research for the almighty dollar. And funding only goes so far as what you can produce. A lot of universities, colleges, and think tanks do experiments like this so they can develop a treatment or a process or a technology, and then they can sell it to private industry and put the money back into other programs. So you might think of this cancer research that was going on and as the preliminary, pre-trial, pre-everything you can think of phase. It's a shame it didn't work out, or at least a greater percentage didn't work out, but it's nice to know that there is somebody out there making sure that we're not getting crazy stuff put into our bodies in the pursuit of curing cancer. This can't always be said of every ailment, as has been recently shown by people that were willing to put all sorts of crazy chemicals in their bodies, on the claim that they would cure the pandemic, the cold virus, what have you. The only redeeming fact about all this is that science ultimately prevailed. And in the very end, that 50 experiments over 8 years are showing the light to the future. Yes, it's a lot of money that's gone down the drain, but ultimately we did show there is a way forward. Now, speaking of scientific information, wouldn't necessarily say scientific, but I've just released my latest book. And it's an expose on child support and family services and the way they enforce their order, or more accurately, they fail to enforce it for both men and women. It's kind of disturbing when you put the facts together, but I think it's definitely worth a read. There'll be a link in the description, and I hope you find it in your heart and have the time to download it. The ebook I've priced at 99 cents because my purpose is to get the information out there. The hardcover is about $10 plus shipping, which will probably be $14.50. Sorry, it's not a hardcover, it's a paperback. But for $15 shipped to your door, especially if you like books, it might be a good one to have on your shelf. There's a lot of research that went into it. But anyways, if you like the show, if you want to support it, the link will be in the description. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Silverlight Show. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, buy the merch, and we hope you have a fantastic day.